Okay, to begin, I mean, sometimes we forget, and in particularly the Western media would like us to think that every time Palestinians are targeted and the crisis emerges, it's something new, and they want to start that on that particular day. In particular, the reference point would be when the Palestinians retaliated. So it would be, look, Hamas is throwing the rockets, therefore we have to do something. Or look, the Palestinians are demonstrating, therefore Israel is reacting. Or look, the Palestinians are throwing stones, so we have to react. So the Western narrative is always counter-Palestinians, is always pro-Israeli. And this is something very important for us to overcome and understand, that the crisis is not because what the Palestinians are doing, but because of the presence of the Israelis there in the first place. That brings a very important questions to us, is how did the Israelis end up in Palestine? And of course, our history is very long and we haven't got that much time, but we can break down the Palestinian crisis in 3 phases. And I'm going to start from the first phase and move towards the final phase, bringing into the contemporary time. The very first phase is the time of the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate and the emergence of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and later on the Balfour Declaration. On one side, we have the Ottoman Caliphate, which controlled the region of Palestine, and the British won that area in World War I, post-World War I, and overtook the area of Al-Sham, and Palestine was occupied by the British. The British subsequently, or even before that, passed the Balfour Declaration, in which they tried to establish a Jewish homeland for a Jewish people on Palestinian land. Now, what is very interesting in the first phase, that the first phase is a political phase, where only the elites in Europe, in particularly, in fact, just Britain, and the Zionist movement got together to try and establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The majority of the Jewish people were against this idea. So if you look from the time Balfour Declaration was signed to up until the mid-1930s, nothing substantial demographically takes place. The Jewish population would not leave Europe. They did not want to go to Palestine to create a homeland. So this was a political vision. It was a colonialist enterprise. That was, if you remember, if we can cast our mind back to 100-year history, that at this time, Britain was a superpower. It had a great Raj, a great British Empire extending to the Indian Raj, and a lot of colonies around the world. And it could do what it liked. It ruled the waves. And in this phase, they wanted to expand and put people so that their empire could be supported and expanded and stabilized. And hence, that's why the Zionist movement comes in here, that they were prepared to bid for the British and be the bulwark for the British as an imperial power and be their servants, literally. And if you look at Theodor Herzl's work, you will find very clearly him stating, Theodor Herzl, who's the leader of the Zionist movement, that we will create a frontier for the British in Palestine so that it can carry on with its empire. But as I say, in this first phase, this political phase, the Jewish people in Europe would not move. They would not go to this so-called Jewish homeland. And the demography shows that, in fact, up until 1933, less than, I think, 7% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. The rest was Palestinian. So you have a major event then take place in the second phase. The second phase starts with the coming to the rise of power in Germany of Hitler and his persecution of the Jewish people and the coming of the Holocaust. That then led to the massive movement of the Jewish people out of Palestine, out of Europe and into Palestine. So this second phase, which starts sort of in the middle of 1930, after Hitler comes into power, we have some very interesting estimates. So if we look at the first phase, when there's 75% of the population is Palestinian, sorry, 90% of the population is Palestinian, and we have a very small Jewish population. By 1933, after that's almost 20 years of the Balfour Declaration, we have only got 18% of Jewish population. We still have 82% population, Palestinian population. Thereafter, we have a massive change. And from 1935, the number of Jews coming into Europe, coming to Palestine increases. And of course, with the end of the Second World War, with the total collapse of Germany and the Middle East, we have a massive exodus of the Jewish population out of Europe into Palestine. And then immediately thereafter, you have the war, the 1947-48 war, the war in which the British government assists Israel, arms it, and undermines the Palestinian people. In that war, then you have a mass expulsion of the Palestinians from their area, from the 1947-48 area, where 75% of the Palestinians are made refugees, and they are refugees even today. And this is very, very important, and I'll come back to this point later on. And this creates a mass exodus of Palestinians now from inside Palestine, and the establishment of the Jewish state. Now, the Jewish state itself becomes established because, for several reasons. One, there's a mass expulsion of the Palestinians. Second, the international community and the United Nations, and particularly America and Britain, enforce upon the United Nations to accept Israel as a state. And in 1947, when the United Nations accepts Israel as a state, something incredible happens. Is they accept Israel as a state on the condition that it abides by UN Resolution 194. Now, this resolution demands that Israel must allow all the refugees, all the people who were expelled, back to their natural homes. So within what was being created Israel. Unfortunately, Israel has never abided by this resolution, and this resolution has been enacted over 100 times. Despite that, the Palestinians have never been allowed back to their natural homes. And this second phase is a very important phase, because this is when now we have the demographic change. Initially, if you remember, I told you it was a political phase, when the political leaders of Europe, Britain in particularly, Europe, America, and the Zionist movement were trying to establish something. The second phase sees the establishment and the demographic change, where the population, the Jewish population, is brought in from Europe into Palestine. And this was almost, it wasn't voluntarily, it was guided, it was manipulated, and it was used at the back of the Holocaust. So we have then the establishment of the state of Israel. On the other side, we have the Nakba, which is the catastrophe of the Palestinian people who are expelled. That brings us to the third phase. So third phase starts immediately after the establishment of the state of Israel. And the third phase is a phase that slowly and surely expels Palestinians. First and foremost, I think, it stops the Palestinians who are made refugees, the 75% population of Palestine, to come back to their natural homes, but also those who are left behind. They were slowly being evicted from their homes, their property being expropriated, and Israel was enriching itself from the Palestinian land and property and assets, and at the same time stopping the Palestinians coming in. On the other hand, what they were doing is they sent out an international invitation to Jews around the world, wherever they were born, whether it was in Russia, in Britain, in, so we say, South America, or in Southern Africa, wherever they were, to come to the newly formed state upon the land of Palestinians, the state of Israel, and they would be given automatic citizenship of Israel, whereas the indigenous Palestinians who had been living there for thousands of years were not allowed to come back. So this double move by Israel then changes the population from a majority of Jewish population to a minority of the Palestinians. And in 1947-48, Israel occupies, I think, 68% of modern Palestine, if I'm not mistaken, at the top of my head. And Israel, of course, is establishing here, and it uses those laws, as I mentioned in the second phase. Now we're entering into the third phase to consolidate its position. This carries on up until 1967. And in 1967, another war takes place, in which the rest of Palestine is occupied and also the rest of Jerusalem. In the 47-48 war, only half of Jerusalem is occupied, the western half was occupied. In 1967, the eastern part of Jerusalem is occupied. And within the eastern part of Jerusalem is Masjid Al-Aqsa. And all the neighborhoods that we are now very familiar with today of the area of in particularly concerned Sheikh Jarrah. And this ties us back very well to the earlier part I mentioned to you that in 1947-48, Palestinians were expelled from their homelands and made refugees. So what they did is they moved towards what we now know as Gaza, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and of course, what is the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem. And they started residing there. And some of the people from 47-48 area, quite a large number of families, were housed in Sheikh Jarrah area. And they were housed and given legal document by the United Nations. And at the time, Jordanian authorities were controlling the eastern part of East Jerusalem to say they could live there and this is their homes. And this is very important on international law and legal terms. What is also very important about Sheikh Jarrah is the area of Sheikh Jarrah is historically immensely significant for us because the word itself, Sheikh Jarrah, comes from Jarrah, Hussam din al-Jarrah. Now, Hussam din al-Jarrah was a physician. He was the doctor for Salahuddin Ayyubi. Salahuddin Ayyubi's doctor, called Hussam din Jarrah, used to live and establish Sheikh Jarrah. So the heritage and the history of Sheikh Jarrah goes back to the 12th century, well before any Zionist aspiration came about or the movement was established, well before British had an empire, well before any idea of a Jewish state. So the Palestinians' descendancy to Sheikh Jarrah can be traced to the 12th century. And Sheikh Jarrah is very close to Masjid Al-Aqsa, as I'm sure Sister Bir will elaborate on that. So we have here the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah that is traced back to the 12th century. And we have a people of Sheikh Jarrah who are made refugees in 1947-48, who are now facing a second onslaught of being forcefully expelled from their houses. As I said, I'll leave that for the other speakers who we have got today. So these are the three phases that I wanted to touch on. So just to recap for you, the very first earlier phase in which the political elites of the West and the Zionist movement try and establish a Jewish state on the land of Palestine, but the Jewish people would not support them. The second phase is the coming to the power of Hitler and the Holocaust, when the Jewish people were forced out of Europe because of anti-Semitism. And something I can add here is that the Europeans and the Americans during that period did not want to house the Jewish refugees from Europe. So they had to be moved. They were forcefully moved to Palestine. And this is a second phase where we have then see a change of the population or balancing out of the population of increasing Jewish population and the Palestinians. And when the war takes place, the 1947-48 war, the Palestinians are expelled, Jewish state is established, and the majority of Jewish population comes into being. And the Palestinians suffer the Nakba, and they become refugees in their own homeland. And then in 1967, we have the war when Israel then extends its borders and occupies the rest of Mandate Palestine, Gaza, the West Bank, Masjid Al-Aqsa, and so forth. And in there is the area of Sheikh Jarrah that is extremely significant for us today, and its heritage and history goes back to Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullahi and being named after his physician, Hussam din al-Jarrah. So this is the background to the situation we found in. So let me end where I began, to say that the problem begins because Israel occupied Palestine. And it is very simple for us to understand this. And this simplicity is what we have to tell our friends, our colleagues, those who do not know about the Palestinian issue. And we should give them a simple example. Imagine one individual comes and occupies your house and then throws you out of that house. And if you retaliate, that individual then turns to the world and says, look, this person is retaliating, therefore I'm going to hit him. or I'm going to punish that person, how would that person feel who's been left out, thrown out of their house? They would not accept it. So the issue is very simple. It is an occupier that has taken and dispossessed Palestinians of their land, their homes, their property, their dignity, their human rights, and their right of worship. And we therefore must rise up and defend the oppressed. And it is our responsibility. Of course, I'm not touching here of the whole other angle here, which I hope Sister Abir takes on board, of the Islamic significance. I've just touched on the historical, the moral, and the ethical right of the Palestinians. But for Muslims, there's an added dimension of our faith that brings us to Masjid Al-Aqsa and its significance and how important that is. I hope the other speakers will expand on what I've introduced in this session, and I hope that together we will unite. And just to end, you asked me, Brother Usam, to talk about, sorry, Brother Shadim, on the work of Friends of Al-Aqsa. In this time of crisis on Palestine, on the Palestinians, please visit our website, foa.org.uk. There are many events that are taking place. We are holding rallies and demonstrations. This Saturday, there is a national demonstration in London where we're hoping we will get over 10,000 people demonstrating. Please try and come if you can. Send a message to people living around London or near London. Make sure they join us this Saturday, starting at midday in London. Second thing we're doing is we have a letter writing campaign to MPs where we're demanding they condemn the Israeli actions and they call upon the British government to call upon sanctions on Israel. I think it is time we should demand what is right. We have already got over 90,000 people in Britain have written a letter to their MPs. If you haven't done that, please join in that campaign and make sure that we do that. I know MPs have been in touch with that. Each MP is receiving over 1,000 letters, and that is making a big change. For the first time since I've started the campaign over 25 years ago, we have now MPs writing to us with their statements condemning Israel. And I think we are seeing a sea change, and this is taking place because individuals like you, one person at a time, is doing something about it. Thirdly, I would like you to, because our media is not telling us exactly what is happening on the ground, use your social network and your social media to send the messages out. Pass the messages out to see what's happening on Palestine in the ground. Follow us on our social media, Friends of Al-Aqsa, social media, or myself, and hopefully you will get lots of information which you can pass on and then inform other people of what is happening on the ground. Because if we try to rely and depend on our national media and what we call the mainstream British media, then the people will be fooled. And unfortunately, as Malcolm X has said, you will end up believing that the oppressor is the bad person, the oppressor is the good person, and that the oppressed is the bad person. That's what's happening. So we have to change those dynamics. On the front of that, or rather on the back of that, is we need to campaign, and particularly against the BBC. Make sure the BBC starts reporting appropriately, uses the right language, email them and complain to Ofcom. That is something very, very important. We have to change the narrative, and these small steps will bring about, hopefully, a force that will bring about a change and liberation of the Palestinian people and an end to the occupation. We have to also remember, as Muslims, which majority of people are here listening today, if we have got a few hours left of Ramadan, dua is very important. And at the back of that, get in touch with your local imams that this Eid khutbah must be on the virtues of Masjid Al-Aqsa. We have written to most of the mosques in Britain, but if those who haven't received our email or text messages, please let your local imam know to focus on virtues of Masjid Al-Aqsa. We have got a whole template on our website with a lot of information if the imams need help of how to deliver those khutbahs. That way we will inform the congregation of the virtues of Masjid Al-Aqsa. These are some of the stuffs that we're getting through Brother Shadim of how to increase the awareness of Palestine and the Palestinians and the virtues of Masjid Al-Aqsa so that we can bring about a change. Jazakallah Khan for inviting me, and I hope we've made a reasonable contribution for the others to pick up on.
Jazakallah khair, Ismail Bhai. Really important reminder, and alhamdulillah, we're really blessed that Friends of Al-Aqsa is doing some amazing work, and we're able to support that. Just to give us a summary, because I think the most important thing here is people want to know, proactively, what can we do? What are those points of action? So, there's a number of things that we've spoken about previously, but, can we just break each one down? And I think, a really important one that we've discussed is, helping fundraise and support the work of Friends of Al-Aqsa and other organizations. So Bismillah, over to yourself, Ismail Bhai.
Jazakallah khair. First, let me apologize that I had to go and attend another event. So I'm sorry I couldn't be with you throughout. But I can imagine the very common concerns throughout, as I've been speaking up and down the country, or with people up and down the country, rather, through Zoom nowadays. And it revolves around several factors. First is this hope that there is some knight in white armor called the Muslim army is going to emerge from somewhere and solve our problem for us. Well, what I say to that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah, unfortunately, will not ask us what did the Muslim countries or the Muslim leaders did in 2021 when Masjid al-Aqsa was being attacked, or when Gaza was being attacked. If he was ever to ask us, he will ask us, what did you do? Only we as individuals have a responsibility for what we do, not other people. And here lies our solution, not our problem, our solution. Because if we as individuals do stuff, what we are capable of doing, nothing beyond what we're capable of doing within our remit and possibility. And summa alhamdulillah, and inshallah, that will create a united force, and that will bring about a change. Don't believe that victory only comes through military battles. Victory, the long-term victory in Islam and in history, have always come through civil society's movement and changing society. Just think about South Africa. No army invaded South Africa to end apartheid. The world society changed, and South African apartheid regime could no longer exist. We, the people, made it collapse. In fact, those who are old enough, like me, and who campaigned for the collapse of apartheid South Africa, Margaret Thatcher used to call Nelson Mandela terrorist. And then when the time came, she had to roll out the red carpet for him. And we made that change, not the leadership. Up until the 11th hour, United States of America and Britain did not help end apartheid South Africa. I'm talking about the regimes, the governments, but the people made that happen. We can make that change in Palestine. So let's not think about a concept, an idea, and be despondent. This is not the time to be despondent. Allah has given us so many assets and capabilities and facets that we can employ to change about this. And you might think things are insignificant and little, but they're not. Boycott, divestment, and sanction is so important now that we should check the label of every product we buy. If it is from Israel, don't buy it. And you might say, what does 10 pounds, 1 pound, 5 pounds do in me not buying Israel? What change would that make? Well, it will make several changes. First, it will make you a better human being, that you are investing your money and spending it ethically. Secondly, it will teach those around you, your own family, to become ethical. Thirdly, imagine a bullet, a stun grenade, only cost 10 pounds. If your 10 pounds that you buy Israeli product with was used to buy that bullet or that grenade, think about it. That 10 pounds is so important when you don't spend it for Israeli product, that Israel at the moment is spending millions of pounds around the world to make sure that people do not do boycott, divestment, and sanction of Israel, because it hurts them. And economically, one way we can change, and imagine millions of people in Britain, millions of Muslims, and non-Muslims are even more active than us in boycott, divestment, and sanction. Together, we can bring about a change if we all act every day, whether it's in the news or not in the news. The issue of Palestine, we make sure that we do not buy Israeli products, something very strong. I think the other thing is our politicians will not change because it is in their vested interest to support Israel colonial's apartheid state. We have to make them change. Irrespective of the fact, historically, they have supported Israel. They support Israel even now. Our government supports Israel even now, unquestionably. But we need to change that dynamics. Don't think that the next leadership will not change, or we will not be in a position to change who becomes the next leader of either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or the government. We will slowly be able to change that, but we have to unite. Every demonstration that I have been to, almost every, apart from the last two or three, have been the majority of people who participate with us are non-Muslims. Of course, we live in a majority non-Muslim country, so we expect that. But what I'm trying to indicate here is we have many friends out there, many friends, millions of friends, literally millions, and it is not an exaggeration, who are willing to be with us, to walk with us, to boycott Israel with us, to champion the cause of Palestinians. Let's use them and create a mass movement in this country that can bring about a change. And it will also be a great way of giving dawah to these people. Amazing way through the issue of Palestine and Masjid Al-Aqsa. Is a great barakah in there. So this is a second aspect. So let's lobby our politicians. The first one I talk about, the boycott, divestment, and section. Second is let's lobby. Again, don't, as I mentioned to you, I have been working on this for over 25 years now. I have never in the history of Palestine, even during Operation Cast Lead and all the other attacks that took place on Gaza and on West Bank and Masjid Al-Aqsa, we have never had MPs write to us giving us their statement. This is the first time that's happened. It is because individuals like you on this Zoom chat today who have been listening and responding and complaining to their MPs, we are having them now write to us to say, we have received over 1,000 emails. Please, this is our condemnation of Israel. We need more of them. Just to summarize, just visit our website. In summary, please follow us on social media and do whatever you can. And together, inshallah, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will bring about a change. And in the last hours of our Ramadan, make du'as and raise your hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and back that up with actions as well. So jazakallah.